Hi Hermits, welcome back to my channel. My name is Dara and today I am going to be reacting to the most popular books that I've read. So I'm going to be logging on to Goodreads and doing this little video trend that I've seen floating about where I look at my read books ranked in order of like average rating and just like take a peep at the top 10 listed there and see how I feel about those books in particular being in the top 10. Now, I do have a tendency of not liking what everyone else likes, so this is probably going to be fairly interesting. Okay, so the book that is appearing at the top of my list here is Hammer, Sickle and Broom by Lara Vincent. And this is like a good opportunity for me to talk about something that I questioned when I saw this trend, because obviously when you're looking at average rating, if it's a book that hasn't been rated by a lot of people, the results are kind of skewed, right? So this book, for example, I know that it hasn't been rated by that many people. So the fact that it has a 4.69 average rating probably doesn't mean the same as a book that has been rated by like 100,000 people that has an average 4.69 rating. But we'll go with whatever comes up here. So Hammer, Sickle and Broom is a memoir actually written by a friend of mine, someone that I've worked with as well. And she is really telling the story of what it was like to grow up in Azerbaijan in the 80s. And for me, this is not a time that I knew anything about at all. It's not really a location that I knew anything about. It's not a political landscape I knew anything about. It's not an experience I knew anything about. So I was definitely interested in reading it. And when she sort of shared in our WhatsApp group that she was releasing this book and did anyone want to give it a read, I immediately was like, yes, of course. And it actually arrived in my life at an important moment. So last year, I had such a reading slump for like the first half of the year. And I remember distinctly sitting and reading that book on like I think the last day of May, and something switched. After finishing that book, I was just in reading mode again, and the rest is history. Here I am now making videos about books. But what I really loved about this in particular, because I have to say that it does touch on some difficult moments. She did have traumatic experiences. It is not like a sanitized, westernized life that most of us are probably used to. And yet, somehow, it still reminded me of Roald Dahl books. So I don't know if you've ever read any of Roald Dahl's memoirs for kids, but there's Boy and there's Going Solo, and he just has this very unique tone. And it doesn't matter if he's talking about like war or death or whatever. It keeps you hooked, it keeps you feeling the magic, it keeps you feeling comforted. And Hammer, Sickle and Broom had the same thing about it. It also dives a lot into Azerbaijani food, and you know I love a book that talks about food. So yeah, I would agree with that. I think I gave it a 4-star. Oh, so okay, so we're going to be seeing lots of Harry Potters here, so I'm not going to count them as like 7 individual books, because that seems like it would be skewing the results. But the next is a Harry Potter book. I actually disagree with this. I do disagree with this. So it's Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I don't think that was the best one by a long shot. Everyone knows the best Harry Potter book was The Prisoner of Azkaban. There is no questioning that. Zero questions, zero doubts. Then we have A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J Maas. So this is the second in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. And I know that this is typically seen as the best. So Sarah J Maas fans seem divided between A Court of Mist and Fury and A Court of Mist and Fury being the best and A Court of Silver Flames being the best. I haven't read A Court of Silver Flames yet, but I didn't think this was the best one. I enjoyed it, I did. But there were parts of it that seemed really dragged out to me. There were parts of it that seemed quite rushed. There were parts of it that just didn't make sense to me from a like relational point of view. And I did enjoy it overall. I just didn't quite enjoy it as much as the third book in the series. So yeah, and that has an average rating of 4.61. Another book that has an average rating of 4.61 is Still by Kennedy Ryan, which I can 100% agree with. I gave it a 5-star, and it was one of the easiest 5 stars that I've ever given a book. It's the final installment in the Grip series, all of which would be like in my top 10 books. I absolutely adored it. This book in particular had me crying, and that's a big deal for me. I don't really cry in life, and especially not when I read. So this, like I said, it's the final book in a series that is chronicling the relationship between one couple. And I can't really tell you much about it without spoiling the previous books, but if you love a love story, this one is for you. I would highly, highly recommend. Okay, then we've got some Harry Potters. Next, we have The Culmination of Everything by Christina C. Jones. So this is a book that I picked up on Kindle Unlimited, and it was fine. It was enjoyable. When did I read this? I think I read this in April. So for like more extensive thoughts on this, check out my April wrap up, which I'll link to in the description. It was an okay time. I liked the characters, I liked the story, like there was nothing wrong with it. It just didn't give me those like magical 5-star fizzy feelings that romance can sometimes give me. So I'm actually surprised, out of all of the romance that I've read, and I've read a lot, this is like one of the ones that's really up there. But that has an average rating of 4.56. Then, okay, so we're getting to some controversial moments here. Then we have The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien, and it has an average rating of 4.55 and a Dara rating of 1. I hated the Lord of the Rings books. I hated them with the fiery passion of Mount Doom. I just don't get it. I don't get the entire globe's obsession with these books. I loved the films. I loved the adaptations. I thought they were masterpieces, and I've seen them so many times. Like, I'm that person who has sat and watched them back to back on the same day multiple times. I really do love the films. But the books, Jesus, they're boring. I remember one summer, I think I was about 14 or 15, I sat and I read all 3 of the books, and it only took me about a week and a half to get through because, you know, I didn't have anything better to do. And that is a week and a half of my life that I will never get back. It is a week and a half of my life that when I look back on, it just feels like it was this vacuum of absolutely nothing. They're dry, they're boring, they're dull, they're not relatable. Like, the pacing is so wrong that, like, they're some of the most unbalanced books I've ever read, so heavy in the description. And for books where so much happens, it just felt so slow. But okay, I'm not going to turn this into a rant all about Lord of the Rings, because I already know that I'm gonna be in receipt of hate for my opinions on that series. Oh god, and the next one too. So next we have Heartstopper Volume 1 by Alice Oseman, and that has an average rating of 4.54. Okay, I didn't hate Heartstopper. Let me just be clear. You can put your pitchforks down. I just don't get the like mad hype for it. I don't. And I think part of that is because I'm not really a graphic novel person. It's not a format that really like gets me invested. It just isn't, and it never has been. I've read a fair few at this point, and I just can't seem to really like get into graphic novels. It wasn't bad, like the art was nice, the story was cute. It just, I don't know, maybe I read it at a time where I just wasn't the right audience for this book, because I'm now 30 years old. I might be 31 by the time you see this. But I'm just not so interested in stories about 14 and 15-year-old boys at school. Like, that's just not the era of life I'm in. When I was younger, I like loved stories about teenagers, but now it's not where I am. And so I can appreciate that it's a really sweet story. I can appreciate that it tackles important topics and has helped so many people in the world feel seen and acknowledged and validated. I can think that the artwork is cute. I'll definitely watch the adaptation, but like as a book, like it was, I mean, I didn't rate it because I just feel like it wouldn't be fair because I'm not the person it's intended for. So again, like, I don't think it's bad. It just wasn't something that I adored. It's not something that I'm going to be obsessed with. Then we have another graphic novel, The Tea Dragon Tapestry by Kay O'Neill, average rating 4.53. So this one I actually really loved, and given my thoughts on graphic novels that I just mentioned, like that means something. So this is the third in the Tea Dragon series of graphic novels, and they're just so adorable. So they're set in this magical world, just filled with tea and filled with dragons, and it's just beautiful. Like the artwork is beautiful, the stories are beautiful. I feel like I want to see a Netflix adaptation of that too. Netflix, if you're watching this, please do that. Like the world will be so grateful. And it's just such a magical story that tackles like inclusivity in so many different ways. So we have like gender, we have sexuality, we have race, we have disability. We see so much representation from so many different groups, from so many different angles, but it's all done in such a seamless and accessible way. I do think these are written for children, but that's why I love them so much, because they're bringing so much representation and inclusivity to young people. And I think that is something that is so needed in literature for kids. Like I would buy these for this series of books for my nephews in a heartbeat. They're both 5 and I think they would love them. Okay, we have another Harry Potter. Let's move past that one. Then we have The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, average rating 4.48. So I gave this one a 4-star when I read it. I don't know if I would actually knock that down a little bit now. Controversial. I know it is beloved. I know it's beloved. And there were things that I did really love about it, and there were things that I didn't. So I loved the character of Evelyn Hugo. I loathed and detested the character of Celia St. James. I loved learning about Evelyn Hugo's life. I loved her story. I loved that she just didn't give a shit, and she was just so herself and unapologetic about her ambition. I really appreciated seeing that. But I didn't love that more focus was put on her romance than her friendship with Harry Cameron, because I thought that was the real magic of this book. I can see why people love it, I really can, and I think it's kind of a nice gateway drug into historical fiction. I've been a historical fiction super fan for many, many years, but I think for people who haven't really entered that world yet, I think this is sort of a nice way to get them a little bit closer to that type of fiction, which I appreciate, because we need more historical fiction readers in the world, in my opinion. Then we have another Harry Potter. Then we have The Help by Catherine Stockett, and that has an average rating of 4.46. So this is an interesting one. So when I read it, it looks like that was in December of 2012, I gave it a 5-star. But 10 years on, I would not be giving this book a 5-star, and I think it's because I am very much more aware of some of the issues surrounding it than I would have been at the time. So just context, this is set, I think, in the 1960s, and it's about a white woman, a journalist, who is, I think, telling the stories of Black women and the white women they work for and like their relationships, something along those lines. And at the time of reading it, I really knew next to nothing about American history. So I didn't really know anything about the civil rights movement. I didn't really know anything about segregation. I didn't really know anything about like lynchings and struggles and white privilege and white saviorism and a lot of the things that we're just all a lot more conscious of these days. And I think also because I was very young, I had like been raised where I'd been raised, so I was very aware of like the history of the UK and the history of Spain, which are the two countries that I'd lived in, but I just didn't know a lot about the lived experience in the US. And so for that reason, I didn't really notice some of the more problematic points in this book. And that's not to say that it's like, it's not racist, it's nothing like that, but there's a definite undercurrent of white saviorism and like tying everything up in a bow and having a happily ever after, which is like, a happily ever after is not a bad thing. I love a happy ending, but I think if I read this now, it wouldn't get the rating that I gave it back in the day. Then we have another Lord of the Rings. Let's just ignore that. Two Towers was the next most popular one. Then we have In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. Interesting. Okay, so that is a memoir about a young Korean girl's escape from North Korea into China, into South Korea. And I read this one pretty recently. I think I read that one in March. I listened to the audiobook. I will link to the wrap up in the description box so you can go and get my like more in-depth views on that book specifically. But I really enjoyed it. What's interesting is that it wasn't necessarily emotionally hard-hitting, which you would think it would be because she suffered some serious trauma, like some really difficult things happened to her and her family. But I don't know if it was the narrator or the style of writing, but there was something detached in the writing style that didn't devastate you. And there are definitely memoirs that I've read in the past where less tragic things happened, but they emotionally devastated me. And that wasn't the case here. So if you are interested in reading like maybe a memoir that has a topic that might challenge you, but you're not really in a place where you can take your heart being put through a garlic press, this might be a good one to start with. I really enjoyed it and I can see why it has an average rating of 4.46. It was very well written, it was very clear, it was very concise, it tackles some really important topics, it educates you in a way that doesn't feel patronizing. I enjoyed that book. Then we have Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. And you know, this one is a bestseller. So many people have read this and loved this. I read it back in January. Again, I'll link to the wrap up where I talk about it some more. I know now, so I didn't know at the time, but I know now that there are controversies surrounding the author. But you know, Google that if you're interested. If you're leaving the, let's say, authorial context to one side, the book itself is a really lovely time. So it is set in the South in the 60s. And it's about this little girl who is known as the Marsh Girl. So she lives in a cabin in the marsh and she's very much an outcast from the like town she lives right next to. And it's about her life sort of dealing with her family and then dealing with being alone, the relationships that she cultivates, the way that she survives, and the ramifications of some of the choices that she makes. And so while that is one of the main storylines, then we also have this parallel storyline of a murder mystery. So we know that like the golden boy of the town is found dead and it's decided that he was murdered, and the townspeople essentially just decide that she did it. Despite there being no evidence, despite there being no reason, they decide that she did it. and so we know that she's being put on trial for this. So while we're sort of seeing the trial and seeing what happened around the murder, we're also seeing like her life story. And I really enjoyed it. The first few chapters were a bit tricky to get through because it just seemed like our main character was getting clobbered by tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, and I don't necessarily find that fun to read. So pushing through that gets you to the good part. I made myself push through because I was reading it for a book club. So then we have the next book in the Tea Dragon series. So we have the Tea Dragon Festival, which is book number 2. Then we have some more Harry Potter. Then we have A Court of Wings and Ruin, which I think is my favourite ACOTAR book from the original 4. Then we have Verity by Colleen Hoover. So this, again, it's another one of those books that I think TikTok has brought into the mainstream. I picked it up on Kindle Unlimited last year, and you know, I had a fine enough time reading it. I click really well with Colleen Hoover's writing style just because she gets the pacing right. Like, she writes short chapters, very easy to get through, and she just keeps the action happening. Verity is one of her thrillers, whereas she typically writes romances, and it was okay. Like, there were definitely some elements where she created some great suspense and just this sense of general unease and creepiness. I know that a lot of people love the twist at the end, but I'm just a bit like it was fine. It was fine. And you can see how it's definitely inspired by Jane Eyre, and I love a Jane Eyre retelling, so you know, it gets points for that. Do I think it's her best book? Absolutely not. Was it still enjoyable? Yes. Am I surprised that it has a 4.43 average rating? Not really, just because I've seen how popular it is with everybody else. But it's definitely not, it's just not my top choice from her backlist. It's not. And then we have a book called It's Not Your Money by Tosha Silver. And this is like a wealth, abundance, mindset kind of book, and it has an average rating of 4.42. I scored it a 2. I felt like it was kind of basic. I mean, I've read a lot into this topic before, so it wasn't anything that I didn't know, and I felt like it was too anchored in like didactic religious beliefs, and that's just not my jam. Then we have This Is Going to Hurt, Secret Diaries of a Junior Doctor by Adam Kay. This has an average rating of 4.41, and I gave it a 5-star. I love this book. I thought it was chef's kiss fantastic. So funny. So funny. But also really highlighting some issues with the healthcare system in the UK. So it tells the story of a junior doctor, and he is like chronicling his life in that profession, like learning how to deal with situations, telling us stories of some hilarious patient interactions. And I just found it so funny. I listened to the audiobook, it was brilliant. It had me laughing out loud. Definitely recommend it. Then we have The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. So this is a book that I read last year, and it's a novel in verse telling the story of a young man's life. So starting from birth and then through his life as he sort of deals with his dual heritage. So his mother is Greek and his dad is Caribbean, and he has like a quite complex relationship with his family. And so we're seeing that. We're also seeing him come to terms with his sexuality, go off to university, and then ultimately enter the world of drag. And I just thought it was beautiful, it was accessible, it was fun, it was emotional at times, and it was all written in beautiful poetry. So definitely got high marks for me. I gave it a 4-star just because it was a very quick read, and it didn't necessarily get me in the emotions in a way that I need a 5-star to get me. Like this, it's very subjective. It is not a scientific process at all, but I need that fizzy feeling if I'm going to give something a 5-star. Then we have Chillpreneur, which is a book by Denise Duffield Thomas, and that has an average rating of 4.40. And this is it's kind of it's not really self-help, it's more like a professional development book. So it's written for business owners who want to stop being such total workaholics and just learn how to live a more chilled life. So the tagline is how to run a wildly successful business without losing your mind. That's very much the vibe of the book. Then we have Well Read Black Girl by Glory Eden, or edited by Glory Eden. So this is a collection of essays by Black women, and essentially they're all talking about a book or a character or a story where they saw themselves represented. So they're typically talking about books by Black authors featuring Black characters. Some of them are things that we all know and love, some of them are things that I'd never heard of, but I really enjoyed this. I read it cover to cover, but it's definitely something that you could just sort of pick up and like read an essay at a time. It's something that I definitely think I will go back to just to like collect more recommendations for books to read. I gave it a 4-star. I thought it was great, and I definitely recommend it, especially if you're committed to reading more diversely. And then we'll end on this one. The last book on this list is All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata, and this has an average rating of 4.39. I gave it a 4, but I'm bumping that up to a 5. Done. It is now a 5. But this was the first Mariana Zapata book that I read, and it definitely sparked a love affair for me. It sparked a love affair for slow burn romances and for her backlist in particular. But it tells the story of a woman who is trying to get away from a breakdown of a relationship, and she goes back to a town where she lived short term with her mother back in the day, and it was also the location where her mother went missing. Her mum went on a hike and just never came back, and she has always wanted to go back and figure out what happened. So she takes this time after her breakup to go stay in this small town, reconnect with people she knew there, and try and like trace her mum's steps. And while she's there, she meets Mr. Rhodes, who is the owner of the place she's staying that she found on Airbnb, and his son. And it's just their relationship unfolding, and it's really delightful, and I would definitely 100% recommend it. So this has been kind of an interesting exercise. So we've probably seen about half of the books being in this highly ranked list that I would agree with, that I loved, and then half of them where I'm just like, hard pass. So I don't know what that says about me, and I don't know what that says about you and your taste. But if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned in this video, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think they deserve to be the most highly rated on Goodreads or not? Let me know. Okay, I'm gonna love you, leave you, and let you get on with the rest of your day. Thank you for joining me today, and I will see you in my next upload.